Hey, all, I'm Elio Faucheron,
I'm Neri.
and we are going to deep dive the 6.1 trailer.
Yes, let's get into gods and legends and myths.
Yes, and only a few of the things did we totally call. I'm just going to say that here. So we start out with Tataru empty nesting and totally pretending like she's fine.
Makes me a little bit sad. Makes me a little bit, I feel bad for her.
Yeah, I feel like the first couple seconds, there's not a lot of huge lore significance. We mostly get, what I think will be the MSQ and kind of setting up for Tataru's grand adventure or that whole side quest shtick. But the main thing I think that comes away from that is seeing the Scions.
Yeah, so Thancred and Oriange are in Charlian, right? They're at the launch station.
Yes, and then we have Graha, who seems to be in Thavnair, Yshtola, who seems to be in Noumenon, and Kryl, who we don't know where she is, but the fact that she's included is in and of itself big, as it tells us that she is going to continue to be a key player, which we hoped and thought would be the case, but confirmation.
I think this plays into our theory of the new generation of the Scions.
Yes, very much so.
So I don't think there's a lot to summarize in this besides that the direction of the so at the end of the MSQ, the Scions all sort of jasperize to their own locations where you can find them after the MSQ and talk to them. They don't seem to be in the areas that you might 100% imagine them to be. Besides Yshtola, who obviously, as we learn later on, is still dealing with her shard issue.
Yeah, exactly. I think if we look to Kryl, we have no clues, so showing anything. We look at Oriange and Thancred, and the one thing I'll say that is, I do think matches sort of Oriange in a way, is that he has been tied to the Loporrits at this point. So him in any way being connected to the Ragnarok and maybe them venturing onto Ultima Thule or elsewhere does seem like their kind of bro adventure going on in the background.
Yeah, I see that. They've been really the last two expansions, well, the last current expansion and the expansion before that, they've been really enjoying Oriange and Thancred as a pair, which I see. It's a fun pair.
Yeah, I think because they aren't even foils to each other, but they're not the most natural couple, and so they end up being non-conflicting, but also very supportive.
Yeah, I like them together. Yshtola seems to be, in this section of the trailer at least, in the path that we would imagine it to be, research, looking into the sort of directions that we were thinking she'd look in. So I don't think there's any big surprises there.
No, and on top of that, we double down get she's researching the exact things we think of, but that's later on.
Yeah, I'm looking at the flooring in the Kryl panel, and I just can't recognize it. It could be any number of things.
Yeah, it literally could be anywhere. You could maybe think it's the Rising Stones. It looks a lot like parts of that.
It could be the Rising Stones, but then again, the first thing that popped into my mind was the Crystarium, and we know it's not that. It's surely not the Crystarium. So,
but we get the most important of lore, which is that Tataru knows how to cross stitch.
Yes, so obviously we are getting a lot of Tataru spotlight, which anyone who listens to our Lore Talks episodes will know I enjoy personally.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just, there's no but really. I'm just glad to see it.
Yeah. I'll always take more. I'll take more of all Scions, even the Scions that are not my A tier. I will gladly take more of, because I think, on the whole, any further characterization can only improve the characters in this game.
Yeah, I agree.
There is so much going on. Not like in I can't follow, just in like there's so much to talk about here.
There's a whole lot.
I don't even know where to begin, but let's start at the start then. We have Estinian with a bunch of treasure hunters who have a treasure map to somewhere in the Thavnarian area. And they have the line, we have to be crazy to give this away. And then cut straight to them giving it away to Estinian.
Right. So looking at this, this is interesting, right? Looking at the characters. At first I thought this from the back was Nero. It's not.
No.
I mean, I'm almost certain it's not. It could be Riol.
It could be real. My impression is that it is purely characters made just for the MSQ for this.
It could be.
That's my impression, because it would explain they're just random treasure hunters, right?
Right. I don't recognize the voice actor.
No. And on top of that, like if you were gonna do something with seafaring people like that, you would want to do a clear Riol or like Sicard, or there's multiple characters that would make sense to make explicitly there.
So looking at the map, right? The map that we get a view of.
Yes.
So
The very next shot.
I'm kind of so just give me your opinion on this. What map is this?
This, in my mind, is there's two options, and that it is either a map of the islands north of Thavnair and the Bounty, or south between Uznair and Thavnair. And the reason that I would say potentially Uznair is some of what we see later looks a lot like Uznair. However, I do not think it is. I think this is a map to basically treasure islands in northwest or northeast of Thavnair, and it is also the treasure map to find the hidden city beneath the Bounty that Emmett Silk references at the end of Endwalker.
Okay, I kind of see that. So in my mind, so first of all, I've seen people just saying that the hidden sea is Amarat, the ruins of Amarat.
No,
it's not. That's under the Ruby Sea.
No, Indigo Deep.
Indigo Deep. Sorry, yes.
Yeah.
So I think this is generic South Sea. Well, not generic, but undefined South Sea Isle area. That's why it's considered mysterious. This is why it's undefined or whatever.
Here's why I think it's definitely near Thavnair, the Eye of Thavnair.
Right. Yeah.
When the South Sea Isles would be too far south west.
No. Yes. Sorry. I'm referring to the wider collection of islands. I'm referring to. No, sorry. I'm referring to Thavnair, and I'm using Thavnair as Radzat Han, which is uncharitable. I think these are Thavnairian islands around Radzat Han, is what I'm trying to say.
Here's the one thing that makes me think that it is less close to Radzat Han in the center or in the south, and is a little bit more in the Ridderon, like Korvosi Narrows area.
Okay.
It would be tie it to the Bounty. So if it's in the Bounty, it then could be. We'll get to this soon, but that city, that the dungeon we see, to my mind, is definitely the city, the hidden city beneath the Bounty. The thing to my mind about this is that this then offers a point of contact to get us closer to Korvos. So if we invariably go there, you're encroaching ever closer.
Right. So are you seeing Korvos as almost Endwalker content, later Endwalker content, or just the path being laid?
I think it is realistically path being laid. I think there is a non-zero chance Korvos could be something like where the Relic quest is,
right? Or
could be something we do get in Endwalker in the 6.x.
Yeah. So if you think about Korvos, in how it's described to us, we hear about a lot of Algan machinery. I sort of imagine it as almost Cartano-like, in less devastated, but with the same degree of tombstones floating, those huge structural tombstones floating everywhere. It just kind of feels like a Relic quest area to me, how it's been described. So I personally think it will be the Relic quest area for Endwalker. I could be proven wrong, of course. I have been before.
Well, but I would like to point out, I think that this trailer has proven you right in a number of interesting ways, or at the very, very least, has validated aspects of your past theories when we get to the stuff on the 12th.
Right, yes, definitely. I agree with you there.
I do think Korvos or Airslaint would be interesting places for the Relic grind. I think there's a lot of different other places that could be done. But I will put money down on Korvos being relevant within the next 2-ish years, even onto 7.0 maybe. But I do think that there's a benefit to us exploring the Bounty and the Korvosi Narrows, because they're places that, as important as they are, other than, I guess, the Ridderon Cataract, which is technically close to the Korvosi Narrows, it's a place that we don't really do much in.
Right. So, just an additional piece on this map. So, looking at the design in the bottom left corner of the map, you see the just below the compass.
Yes.
Obviously, so you've got a minaret there, which doesn't
same design as the boss. It's
yes.
The same design as the minion and the boss for the dungeon.
Yes. Which I think will have some significance. This whole design, although obviously very, very clearly sort of draws on Persian and Indian motifs, it's very distinct. I think this kind of style of art, of architecture, of creatures will become important in the immediacy, if not the long term.
Absolutely. I also thought that there was some interesting parallels. The use of its eye design and its Persian design and all that. I was a little reminded of parts of Scala,
I can see that, yeah.
but I never know how much of that is a loose inspiration versus
Right.
like that real world societies have crossover, right?
Well, definitely. And I mean, there is Indian influence in Alamigo, and the problem with Scala, the persistent plague of anyone who's into Scala, is that we don't know what in the dungeon is Alamigan, and we don't know what is Scalan. So much of it is muddied. So it's really hard to discern how much of it is the sort of, like the Ananta Indian sort of slightly inspired vibes of Alamigo, and how much of it is Scala as we see it.
The thing that we can agree on, full board, no question though, right, about this is that it is Thavneri.
Yes.
You've got the eye, you've got all the imagery you see later looks like Thavnerian architecture or Vanaspati or like it's very familiar.
Yeah, so what I would almost be interested to see is if the eye in the top right is considered as a contrast to the design in the bottom left. I wonder if this is a clashing of cultures. Now, I'm not prepared to say that it is, but I think it's possible.
Well, one interesting factoid too about the map is if you look at the eye, it's surrounded by a dragon, which means that as much as this may be ancient, it probably would have been created around the time in which Vritra would have been a part of the culture and community of Thavner, which means that Vritra could offer us quite a bit of insight into this whole affair, which, since we see Varshan and Vritra later, seems very much a thing.
Right, and Varshan almost seems... Well, we'll discuss that later, but Varshan almost seems conflicted or regretful. So shall we move on to this image of this almost swampish area that we see?
Absolutely. And the important thing to note here, I think, is that if you look at it, you're going in there as a dungeon. You can see the trust system and the people Istinian Graha and Yshtola who are in with you later in the dungeon, which means that this dungeon starts above ground and ends underground and underwater.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's true. I think that we head in through this abandoned dungeon, which is... I've been sort of toying with an idea, right? It's because I was discussing it today, actually. So, the Mandala of Cebu was a Filipino state that was founded by an Indian prince who left India. He was a Tamil prince. He left India and settled in the Philippines in the 1200s or something like that. So, before you think of globalism and these huge scale travels. So he settled in the Philippines and founded his own nation there. And I almost wonder if this is a similar sort of thing, like a sort of a split off Thavnerian nation. Because obviously the things that we see are in ruins.
Yes.
So I wonder if this is an offshoot of the Thavnerian culture, the Thavnerian civilization that moved on to a different Thavnerian island than Radzat and started their own culture there.
Well, we also know that migration to Thavner happened in waves. And so it's not crazy to think that there might be splinter groups or groups pre-Thavner that ended up on Thavner. I mean, the fact that the architecture seems would imply, that they have a shared history to some extent. But you could even think about how the Arkasodra, or not the Arkasodra, how the Gajasudra were removed. And I wouldn't necessarily assume this is one of their locales, but the fact that as prosperous as Thavner and Radzat is now, much of its, temples on Thavner proper, are in not disrepair, but ancient. So there's clearly a longer legacy of civilizations.
Right. And then we move on to see the underground, or what we assume is the underground, and we see this large mechanical figure with the almost bull ring in its nose.
Yes, it looks to me, it's definitely it's probably a soulkin, not a forgekin, but it could be. The other interesting thing of note, and this will be a repeated thing we see throughout this dungeon, but you can tell you're already underwater, because if you look at the ceiling, there's glass protecting, and water above.
Yeah, you can see aquatic life forms above. And this room appears to be a treasury. We can see, loose gill and jars. And
one of the enemies you're fighting is a mimic.
Yes. So I wonder if this is almost a lost treasury or a lost archive of things. And obviously, like you said, we see both in the pictures of the ceiling and in the sort of screen after this, we see the windows into the water on the side of the room. So I'm very interested to see what this is.
Do you think that there is a specific touch on the fact that it is Yshtola, Graha, and Estinian? Because I know that it's, oh, we're a tank, so like there's a certain limit to the, group comp, and it seems like the twins are not going to be a major part of 6.1 based on their lack of appearance. But it seemed like these three characters had, like, Yshtola, fleshing forward a little bit, has a very specific line and a thing going on. Graha seems to have a very specific thing going on with Mists of the Realm, and Estinian seems to be part and parcel to the whole exploration of these islands in the first place.
Right, well, I think that brings us to the next screen after that, which is where we see them fighting in front of an image of what we can only assume to be Vritra, in front of a statue of Vritra's head, or of a dragon's head. Particularly an elder worm's head. It doesn't look like a normal dragon.
No.
So
the only thing that makes me pause about it being Vritra is that Vritra has such a distinctive head. I would have imagined that it would be more representational of it. That said, I do think that is what it is supposed to imply, unless it's Azdaja or like other dragons that might have been on Thavnair for a short period of time.
It could be Azdaja. I mean, God knows I want to hear about Azdaja. But I would be surprised if we hadn't heard a hint at Azdaja in the expansion, in the base game, in the base expansion. I almost think, I mean, looking at the things that really differentiate itself outside of just general artistic stylization, it seems to be the crown right on top of its head, the crown that's sort of trailing down its back.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of imagine that as a symbol of its services rendered to the state of Radz-at-Han, or of whatever state this is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Estinian's inclusion is intentional. I think Estinian is going to be a significant part of Radz-at-Han's story going forwards. I'm not 100% why Yshtola would be chosen. It could just be the fact that she's so hugely popular. It could just be that she's a DPS character.
I think it's more that these three. I don't think Graha is going to be part and parcel to this story that much. I think this is just 6.1 is going to focus more on these three because it's going to be a focus on Estinian with this, Graha with myths, and Yshtola with her thing. And because they are the focus characters, they were the chosen characters for this trailer.
I think that's entirely plausible. Yeah, I do. I think that we can conclude with, some security that this whole dungeon is built after Vritra joins the civilization.
Yeah.
Or, and this is a fringe theory entirely of my own with no backing, it's a splinter civilization that was featured around Azdaja.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things where I think with what we know now, both are reasonable possible interpretations, and then once we know the truth, one of those is just going to seem silly.
yeah,
Agree. Also, I know you'll appreciate this. I saw this enemy, and all I could think of was the jellyfish from Elden Ring.
I actually was 100% about to say that. Yes, so it's obviously a jellyfish. It's obviously linking into the underwater nature of this dungeon, which I'm overjoyed with. We haven't seen one since Satasha Hard.
I mean, you could kind of argue like Anesis.
Okay, yeah.
Different vibe, but I would say that there's a part of that vibe that it does kind of fulfill.
Yes, the underwater nature of Amnesis and of the Tempest was always slightly suspended for me. It didn't, it was obviously underwater, but it almost felt separated from the aquatic nature of it slightly. So, yeah, this is very much an Elden Ring jellyfish type vibe. And then we see this thing that's producing two shields, right? The obvious Forgekin / Soulkin.
Well, and you can see what looks like, I don't think it is necessarily, but there's like a Garlean claw out in the corner, like the Garlean death claw, which makes me wonder,
right,
if there's any connections between this place and Gaug.
Now that's interesting. So when I was looking at the map, I decided not to bring this up because I thought the tie was really flimsy, because I was looking at one of the islands, right? We know that Gaug, correct me if I'm wrong here, isn't hugely far from the coast of Thavnair, right?
No. It's in the Ritteran Cataract, which is basically right in the Corvosi Narrow. Like,
right.
Gaug would literally be one of the like closest places to these islands if they are placed near where I think they're placed.
Right, so in the center of the map that we saw, there is a structure which is largely sort of a glass field topped by a mini minaret and sort of a darker bottom. I almost saw that as representative of a tower's top, and the first thing that came to mind was Gaug. No, I'm not saying that is Gaug, but that's what it brought to my mind first. I think there is almost a plausibility that we see the Garleans not as Thavnarian, but as, in their original form, of a similar cultural stock to Thavner.
Close in relation in the same way that, like, you can't differentiate... Oh, what's a great example? There's not a great example, but you can't differentiate, like, Doma from Hingashi, right? Like, they are two different places with two different cultures, but their location in physical space means that there is an interrelation between them.
Right. I mean, if we were to look at real life, for example, and I know that I love to bring up real life history in these videos, but bear with me. For example, like the Hunnic civilization that invaded Europe, and then the Xiongnu, which came before them and dominated northern China centuries before. I think there's, these are nations that are considered in some academic circles to have a shared lineage of some degree. And the places these civilizations end up was wildly different. And I don't see any reason this can't be true in a MMO with as much attention to detail as 14.
Yeah, I see it as something that's reasonable speculation that, again, is one of those things where when we find out the truth, much like a lot of the stuff later in this, we will either feel deeply vindicated or like, well, that was a wild theory on our part. But I do think there's really something to point to the fact that this game does, that they have death claws, right? You could choose a lot of other things to have been looking at their function and laser blasters, and yet, like, there's a lot of other things you could have chosen to be that, but have a prototype for something that's so associated with Garlemald later on seems too intentional on face value.
Right, and that's interesting as well, because Garlemald, we know, got the death claws from Alec. So this either places the Allegan influence on Garlemald earlier than we might have suspected, or this is a provincial outpost of Alec. It's sort of a fringe theory there, but plausible, perhaps?
Well, we know that if you flip a coin, heads it's Allag, tails it was somehow also still related to Allag. So,
right.
Frankly, I mean, it could be related. The only thing that makes me pause is that the design aestheticism is so... Like, every time we've experienced Allag under any context for any reason, it's so clearly Allegan, right? And whereas this is so aesthetically not. But one other thing it could be is we know people like the Onishishu. Like, there were people who fled Allag who still had knowledge of Allag, and maybe some of those people ended up in Thavner.
Yeah. I mean, if we really want to take the Allag allegory to the nth degree, the Roman Empire wasn't assimilationist. It allowed the people that it conquered to retain their culture so long as they were loyal and useful to the Roman Empire. So perhaps this represents, like you said, an Onishishu-esque branch of the Allegan Empire that retained their Far Eastern culture and founded this. And I mean, when we look at an island that we have to assume nearish Thavner / Golg and has Forge kin / Soul kin. The one in this image kind of looks like Forgekin to me.
Yeah, I think so. The Death Claws are Forgekin, so I mean, like, that even further suggests it.
Yeah, and the one in the middle, it's got like valves and chambers. So I kind of have to assume that it's in some way related to Golg.
And that will be very interesting to find out more about, and I will not be surprised if we actually don't get as many answers as we think. But... Yes. Jumping into the next shot, the fight against the boss, everybody's tied up in ribbons.
Yeah, so it's a Forgekin again, I would wager. It could be a Soulkin, but it looks a bit Forgekin-y to me. And it's obviously covered in these bright cloths. It's a really pretty design, actually.
Yeah, it's very lovely.
The backdrop that it's placed against is very, very obviously Thavnarian.
Yes. In fact, the background design also looks quite a lot like the warding scales created during Endwalker.
Well, so looking at the background, right, this almost dais on a throne, right, with the almost peacock feather type thing.
Mm-hmm.
So what that brings to my mind is Myanmar or Burman imagery, which is very heavily tied with peacocks through the Tongu nation. So that's interesting to me. And it's not like Southeast Asian cultures are not represented in Thavner. They are. You can see them if you go through Thavner. You can, and obviously they're very Indianized. So the link there doesn't surprise me much.
No, it tends to be in 14 that they pick maybe a primary cultural lens, but everything is typically a blending of multiple inspirations.
Right. I can't think of any one nation that is one thing. I mean, for God's sake, Alamigo is Scotland and India and certain Arab states as well. So, I mean, come on.
No, you're right. You're right. I mean, I feel like the closest you might argue for is like Charlian being classical Greece, but like even then, it's not. Like it's a much broader context.
I mean, even then, we have to sort of look at Charlian draws a lot on modern civilization as well.
Right.
So this boss is interesting to me. It looks like a Forgekin to me. I'm not sure how you feel.
I could take it either way, and I usually withhold judgment. I historically default to Soulkin only because Forgekin have been relatively rare, but as technology integrates more and more into the story, I've been more reticent to make that assumption. I could really go either way, but I totally see the read for it being a Forgekin.
Right. One of the reasons I think it could be Forgekin is, like you said, the stuff that we've seen prior, and the fact that there's steam venting from the machinery behind it. So this is interesting. It looks like a fun boss.
Yes.
So I'm really excited to try it out as well.
Do you think everyone's going to get dizzy and then like you have to try and fight it while your controls are all messed up?
I think it's plausible. They tend to throw that mechanic in every like 2 patches, every 2 or 3 patches. So I could see that happening. And the tie-in thing, obviously they're going to want us to evacuate from the area that it pulled us into.
I was going to point out too, another inspiration is we can see that there's elephant imagery here, which I think is very important because it tells us something about the time period in which it was probably made and some kind of connection to the Archosodra.
Right. Yes, I see that. So we do have the elephants on the side, which seem to be built into the machinery a little bit, but are stone or ceramic. And in this shot where we see the elephant, we also now see the boss's sword as well, which reads to me as somewhat Indian inspired.
Yes.
So I definitely think the Gajasura were... the Archosodra, that whole species, the Matanga species in general, were at some point relevant to this culture.
This may be a reaching piece of detail, but the fact that it's the color it is makes me think that it must have been before the Gajasudra exodus, or, kicking out, really. Because it's not blue, it's gray. It's, the color of a Gajasudra rather than Archosodra.
No, that's interesting. I don't necessarily think that needs to be representative, but I think it's possible.
I espouse that is a reaching piece of detail, but seeing as we are now going to go through the entirety of a 3-minute video over the course of probably an hour. But yeah. So besides the crystalline conflict stuff that shows up, which, I mean, there's not necessarily a lot to talk on other than it's cool. We get Vritra, Varshan, but Vritra and his lines relating to protecting people well, and also about how he's failing to uphold them. And that kind of ties into our episodes on End Talkers and how we have really doubled down about the amount of times Vritra, those lines come back up during the story.
Right. So the way I read this is that we see a demoralized Vritra in the MSQ. Now, God knows what could make him demoralized in the wake of what we saw him in the expansion patch, but I do almost wonder if we're going to learn some stuff about the history of Thavner or about Azdarja or Vritra that will hit a little closer to home for him.
There are 2 things possible here in my mind. One of which is that this is him in the aftermath of Arawan.
Arawan.
Of Arawan and how his loss and Fritra's inability to protect him, and if that's maybe it's only that weighing on him and we're being psyched out here, which I wouldn't put past Yoshi P. Another possibility is that he might have been in a position to try and protect one of the Scions or someone and failed to, and that's why he seems it depends on if the fact that he lived up to it, his lines here are referring to him failing to protect the friends we were supposed to protect, or him failing to protect those around him for which he had love and value, and especially with like the loss of Arawan, I can imagine that.
So the only signs that I could see him failing to protect that would be of narrative importance to him would be thinking back to Thavner, Estinian number 1, of course, and Alizé, because Alizé has a number of important moments in Thavner as well. Now, that's not to say that it's restricted to these characters, but these are the Scions that I see most emotionally involved in the Thavnarian story. You know, Alizé making her stand against the Terminus beasts and stuff like that.
What is really interesting to note in the first shot where we see any of the Scions with Varshan is we only see Urianger, Graha, Yshtola, and Estinian. Now, the thing is, that doesn't mean that the line that's being said is being said at that moment. So the fact that we see Estinian does not mean that something bad does not happen to Estinian later, because it immediately cuts to Kryle looking worried and Graha clenching his fist. However, it looks like they're in the Baldesian annex based on that shot. So it's clearly trying to either mislead us or obfuscate.
Right. So I also wonder why I wonder why Vritra is still using Varshan.
That's a really great point. Why? Why would he bother?
Is it just ease of access to buildings? I mean, like, most buildings can't accommodate a Great Worm, obviously.
Yeah, it could be so simple. But that is the point I had not even considered. Why bother when the people of Thavner already know that he's their leader? I think you're right, and you could also wonder if it just helps facilitate interacting with people on the regular.
Yes.
Both the literal going in of buildings, but also just like being in and of the island world. It's, you know, if you're wandering around as a great worm, that's going to be
right.
It's gonna call attention.
I mean, that's undeniably true. I almost wonder, and this is very, like I said previously, a very fringe thought, but I almost wonder if Vritra is experiencing a sort of dissociation between the personas he's adopted in public for the last, millennia or two, and his own personal being. I wonder if Vritra is feeling a disconnect between Varshan and Vritra, and that's why he's feeling sort of disheartened.
I think it's very possible. I think whether it be from his own internal conflict or from exterior conflicts, the fact that he's not being just dropped by the wayside and that 6.1 will be dealing with the aftermath of Endwalker, which time and time again, I'm trying to explain that nested consequences and dealing with fallout is a part and parcel to how Final Fantasy XIV tells its story. So it's no surprise, and if anything, some vindication.
So, do we think this volcano that we see is a central sort of structure of this island that we're looking at that has the underground complex?
So, because it's crystalline conflict, I believe that volcano might just either be a random place or a Hell's Lid from the opposite side, or I think the crystalline conflict locations, because like if you look at the other crystalline conflict location, right,
it's like a sky island.
Yeah, I think it's possible that that's just a region in the Sea of Clouds, the same way that the Sky Pirates are. I think these are supposed to be very naturalistic parts of the world and environments.
Okay,
that's my read on them.
Well, they work as that. They do work as that.
Because historically, all the other maps have been that way too, for PvP.
Yeah.
With Frontlines, you've got the islands around Cartnow with like Allegan stuff. With not Triple Triad. With Rival Wings, you have Charlian remnants of locales near and around Dravanian hinterlands and Emporium.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. Obviously the hugely volcanic nature of the island that we see does sort of engender Hell's Lid vibes. I almost feel like it could be a volcanic island in Thavner.
Yeah.
But we won't know for sure until we see that. I mean, obviously the nature of these areas is made very clear by further releases and also the flags that we see in them.
The only other argument I think, the only other argument I would necessarily see that as is, and this is like fringe as hell, but in the short stories for Shadowbringers, we know that there was an island with an exploding volcano that Azim saved. And one could think that the floating islands looks a lot like the Unsundered Worlds as well, because interestingly, the islands don't have crystals under them. There's no aspected crystals. So the fact that they're floating is interesting and more akin to something like Elpis, which, yes, has the crystals and stuff, but is not as readily apparent. And so, it's possible it's just a part of the Unsundered World, and that's why Crystal Conflict was not a game mode up until now, because it was only a thing done in the Unsundered World as a justification.
That's possible. It definitely is. I'm not 100% sure. Well, no, you are right. There is no crystals. That's interesting. Even on the other smaller islands, there's no crystals. Yep. Okay, that's something to look into. I almost imagined it as like a, not a sky pirate settlement, but as a sky settler settlement, of the same vein of these explorers who send out to.
I want to be clear. That is my primary read. I just think that there's elements that could make me look at it and be like, well, you could rationalize it this way. And I like all the other PvP maps, we will have an answer, I'm sure. Like, you'll just go, if you go to the UI element for the game type, it'll tell you where it takes place. But for now,
yes.
God, the music in Endwalker is fire.
Yeah, well, that's definitely true. So the first thing that we see is Yshtola walking with a mammoth and the Warrior of Light, right?
Yes, and that is the mammoth from Noumenon that helps you find tomes and books. It's
also the mammoth from the Aether Tower. We see those as mobs in the Anti-Tower.
Yes, and specifically in Endwalker, though, early on we had that quest where you meet this one, I believe. I assume. I mean, there might be multiple, obviously.
Yeah.
So clearly, to me, she is beneath Noumenon in the archives that we saw, specifically in the trailer of Endwalker, like the CG trailer.
No, I think that's plausible. I think that's definitely certain. The place where we see G'raha in the trailer, right? I think that's certainly true. I also think that we see. I think that is the Noumenon mammoth. I think that's a wider sort of. They are scholars in Anti-Tower, I'm pretty sure. So I think that it is like a scholarly, a library sort of research puppet type thing. So it's her, that, and the Warrior of Light, and later on we see the doors open to reveal an archive room, very goobel, very sort of like books stacked and books on the shelves, as many books as they can possibly fit into the room.
Well, and it's also kind of humorous that in telling that literally it cuts from them walking towards it to a shot of G'raha.
Right, and G'raha, he's in front of a Sharlayan symbol, right? But he's also in front of an Eorzean map. It
looks a lot like Valdesian Annex, but I don't think there's that same plant life in there. And we're also kind of bearing the lead with Yshtola's lines, her focusing on her research to find a way to reach out and bridge the connection between the reflections, which to anyone paying attention to the lore in any meaningful way, this is a plot beat that's been going on since at the very least 5.3 with her.
Yes, and not just her, like the science in general have a vested interest in this.
Yes, I mean more specifically that she has had a stated goal of, I am going to find this, I am going to solve this, and every patch she has had some kind of dialogue, either in the MSQ or when you find her in the world, alluding to her working towards this goal. That's been a very specifically, everyone has a vested interest in it, especially people like Thancred with Reen, but Yshtola has been like, I am going to solve this problem.
Yes, and who better than G'raha to include in it? Well, Thancred maybe, but G'raha showing up at this moment doesn't seem. I mean, obviously we know that he's involved in the myth storyline as well, but who better than him to involve tangentially, at least, in the shard traveling storyline? I mean, him and his various subjects back in the Crystarium, and I think subjects does it a dishonor, but would be an extremely emotional scene.
Absolutely, and he is the one living being with a meaningful amount of experience on the subject. So it totally makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. This almost looks like a facial expression that we haven't seen on Grahal immensely before.
So if we move to the next cutscene, we see Fortunal with the leaders of all the Eorzean city-states, and boy, does this make my heart sing. Also, seemingly in the Tower of Babel.
It's a tower, at least. It is one of the towers.
Well, but as far as we know, the towers disappeared other than the Tower of Babel when
Good
Anima
point.
was destroyed. Like, that's part and parcel to the role quests and all that jazz.
Yes, of course. That's a good point. So it's Foshno, and he's picked up his
Newliths?
Yeah, his Newliths again. And he's with the leaders of the Eorzean Alliance, and of course Hian, who I'm assuming is representing the Eastern Alliance.
Yes, and it's just, oh man, this is going to have some major feelings and vibes, because if nothing else too, it is a major milestone for him to be an active player upon the stage in this way, and on top of that, to be reaching out to connect with them. And what that means for Sharlayan going forwards into the future is huge.
Especially us seeing him in a shot that very specifically frames him as armed, right?
Yes.
That is not without significance. And of course, I think the leaders of the Eorzean and Eastern Alliances will have feelings about the Sharlayans because they've abandoned, from their perspective and a fully understandable and valid perspective, the Sharlayans abandoned them during their struggles.
Yeah, I would say that while there may be complications, and I think this will deal with it some, the fact that Eorzeans could overcome the way Ishgard abandoned them, the fact that Eorzeans could decide to create the Ilsebardian contingent and create a humanitarian mission for Garlemald, and the fact that all of these leaders have shown themselves time and time again dedicated to moving forward into a better future is such that I highly doubt that this will be anything retributive, and what I will in fact, if anything, be more likely to see is less them holding Fortunel to account and more Fortunel holding himself to a certain amount of account and trying to bridge to make amends and bridge the gap.
Oh yeah, I don't ever see this kind of scene ever in 14 being retributive. I don't think that's the type of story they're telling, but I think it will get lip service at least. Then we see...
What we see is the new Castrum Meridianum.
Yeah, sorry, I refer to anytime I see like multiple grand companies together.
The Eorzean Alliance, yes.
Yeah.
But that's exciting. It's a 4-man. Everyone's chasing Sid.
Yes.
Not a lot to say about that, other than I am excited to do that. I'm excited to play that. I'm excited to now do my lore replay now with the whole updated
trust system.
Yeah, it's very, very exciting.
So I think that's a way out of giving hugely unique and insightful lore dialogue, because that would be a lot of work to write. And I think that's a fair thing to do. I think that giving us members of the Alliance, or the Grand Companies to sort of pad out our party is a perfectly fine thing to do. I know it's less flavorful. It's definitely objectively less flavorful, but I think it serves the purpose it needs to.
I think there's somewhat of an irony in this, but I think the fact that it lacks a certain level of flavor might be in some ways a strength. I think having a moment where you get to be part of all 3 grand companies in a final push with them is meaningful in its own right, despite them not being strong, specific characters. It also means, though, that you wouldn't have to be choosing between scions, and instead is just allows them to be, and for you to have that moment. And then as you get into Heavensward On, there's more and more of the scions and specific groups of people who are by your side who have more articulated characters. Yeah,
which is true of 2.0, right? 2.x. The characters that fight alongside us are explicitly not scions. I mean, we hear at length about how the scions are fighting, but they're not, they're not in the dungeons with us, they're not in the trials with us, stuff like that. That they're not on the front lines with us necessarily, unless we see them already on the front lines with us. So it's fine by me. And then we see
the summoning,
right? What appears to me to be a retelling of Hildibrand being summoned onto the first, and I think that we're going to see the fallout of that in his quest.
Yes, and well, the symbol and his glowing yellow light seems to imply that he was summoned by Elidibus during the events of 5.3.
Right, which we kind of knew. We knew, But I think that we're gonna. This is footage that we haven't seen before. This is not footage from that. In that patch, we just see him stood in a corner in the dungeon, sort of talking to himself, right? Here we see him summoned. We see him talking to himself, assumedly saying some hilarious remarks.
Well, and it'll also be interesting to see how he finds his way back. The fact that he still glows yellow mean that I think there must be a way to undo the summoning by Elidibus in a way that doesn't, like, just because we can send him back doesn't mean, aha, we found a bridge. But, like, it's clearly a special circumstance.
Yeah, I think that either the story will involve us returning Hildibrand to the source, or to dealing with the fallout of him having been briefly away, and whatever bright ideas you may get from that.
Yeah. So in the next shot, we get the actual opening of the doors as Yshtola walks into the
library. Yeah.
The part of Noumenon that is challenging for the height deficient. As
right. I mean,
Raha found out.
Can I just say these library shelf pillars are cool as hell.
They are cool as hell, but also if you're short, you're screwed.
Well, yeah, that's true. It's a fascinating room. I've always been, since the expansion dropped, I've been excited to explore the Noumenon's depths and the knowledge held within. If we're ever going to find, further knowledge of the world, of the myths of the world, of how to transverse the shards, this will be where we find it.
Yes, or at the very least, some clue that might proffer onto Yshtola a methodology from tools that already exist, the same way that we saw time travel come to be based on techniques of Alexander and Omega, etc.
Right, exactly.
So, and then in the next shot, we get the EX version of the final day, the Endsinger's Aria.
Right. So, what did you take from these? The mini heads of Meteion? I sort of imagined her, taking the technology of the civilization she's conquered to project these. They look almost more technological than magical to me.
There's absolutely an effect upon them that looks almost technological, almost like data splintering, and I like. There's nothing to refute that. In my mind, I just look at that and I'm like, I think it's just supposed to be projections of despair and her other selves that she carries within her. The only reason I say that is because I have no idea what to make of anything that would be kind of technological, and there up until now has been not something that, like, she didn't use any abilities in the prior incarnation that were tied to other civilizations, but that would be a really cool thing to include as a part of the EX. So I'm not sure how much to make of it. We have the ring that sits behind her. You see like ghost versions of it up in the sky. I think it's just going to get real crazy. That's really all I have to say about speculation.
Well, no doubt that the extreme version will get crazy. There's no doubt of that. It's it could be anything, right? The whole concept of Dynamis is so out of our expectations, still, undefined, that they can do whatever they want with it.
Yeah. The other thing I remember thinking literally from the first time I did the final day was, I can't wait to see the ultimate of this, because the ultimate of it is going to be wild. It
is going to be wild. I'm assuming that the different levels of bans on these pillars are depending on either how long they take until they go off, sort of bomb rock style, or how many people need to be around or away from them.
Yep, something like that. It's going to be fun to figure that out.
And then we see, some interesting characters.
We knew that 6.1 was going to have an Omega and Omicron side quest series, so these two figures aren't exactly surprising, but seeing Alpha and the little Omega toy is exciting.
Yes, and obviously they've been toying with these characters for a while now. They never abandon them. They still turn up sometimes in very background ways, in very subtle ways, but it's interesting to see them brought into the limelight so much. Do you think this is raid tier, or do you think this is just MSQ?
Oh, I think this is just side quest. I think this is an expansive and big side quest, but I see this purely as we're going to Ultima Thule, learning more about Omicron, about the history of them, and there's going to be more catharsis around their civilization and everything regarding that, and that is what this is for.
Right.
I don't see it as part of raid, alliance raid, or it could be partially a lead up to trials, but even then I don't think it's that. I think this is its own branch of a story wanting to be told that doesn't have a place within the normal confines of how they've delivered content to this point.
Yeah. Can we get F's in the comment for the dev team naming their faction Omicron? And then
Yeah, that was the first thing I saw when the Omicron virus But what's interesting is the shot then cuts from Alpha and Omega to us looking up, and this could be a different shot, but it is the same tiling, so it seems like it's the same place. And in the background, there's someone who doesn't look familiar. I don't know anyone who wears those boots in that outfit.
The boots are cool.
Yeah, I think those are the boots from PvP.
Right. Okay. So looking at them, I'm assuming it's because in the background, right, you see of the Omega and Alpha shot, you see the Sharlayan spiral. So I'm assuming this is a Sharlayan researcher.
Oh yeah, I definitely think this is. The tile alone made me think it was Sharlayan, and that outfit makes it seem like a Sharlayan researcher, but those boots are hyper specific.
Right. Yeah. They're either Sharlayan or an Ironworks employee, definitely.
Or I mean, sometimes those outfits have been associated with Garleans, so I'll be fascinated to see.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see as well. I agree.
But now comes for the biggest moment of the trailer, and I'm only half joking. We get Ogul and a beast and a tribal race between two Matanga. It seems like one an Archosodra and one a Gajasudra.
Mm-hmm. An entirely new Gajasudra model, I should say. One with more innateness than we've ever seen on them before. And also, like you said, the hippo mobs, which I'm excited to see for a mount.
Yes. Oh my! Did you see them out? Did you see them in the live stream?
Yeah. Oh my god, that looked awesome.
That was. I was sitting there. My only thought though was like, I wonder if Neri is going to be upset that it's not a Hamsa.
Oh well, I think we're going to get a Hamsa. I am secure in my knowledge that we will get a Hamsa. So
I think you're right. I do love that we get Ogul here, and she was a Alra who was terrified of Matanga because of growing up in the steppe, where they're taught to be terrified of the Gajasudra that are there for
good reason. Yeah.
But now her best friend is, basically an Archosodra. So the fact that she's going to be part of this makes me really happy.
But I think this beast tribe is as sort of what seems to be obviously presented on a surface level as a contest, but I think will become a reopening of ties between between the two Matanga subraces. I think that's a significant thing. I think that plays into the themes of Endwalker of forgiveness, or well, not even forgiveness. That's not the right word, but of forging ties with previously thought of as tyrannical peoples, and of understanding of the individuals of those races as individuals in their own right.
An offering of compassion and grace.
Yeah, and I like I said, this starts off very obviously as a contest. I think it will begin as us, ensuring whatever right this is or challenge this is goes the Archosodra's way, and will end up as the first beginnings of kinship between these two clans that will later bloom in the whole Beast Tribe quest that they usually release at the end. Yes. As a true forging of ties, or at least a true beginning of that.
I think that's a pretty safe assumption. I think it just with the themes and the writing that's gone on so far.
Yes. Yeah. We start off with Fortuno looking back at the Tower of Babil, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is the Garlean Tower.
Which is vast, and we knew it was more of a structure, whereas the other towers were more like extensions of Anima themselves.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense that the Tower of Babil we know was physically constructed actually remained even after the death of Anima. But it looks like the energy is going wild and getting much worse and crazy.
Yeah, I definitely see this as a corrupting influence. I would, by the way, the Fortuno is looking at it, I think it's a surprising occurrence. Or, I mean, I'm sure I didn't say this, but something of ominous nature to the Eorzeans. So yeah, I mean, obviously it's either surprising or very ominous to them.
What do you think's causing it? Because Anima's gone.
I would think so. Obviously, a great deal of the energy is sent up towards the moon. Obviously, we know that. But I would, well, then again, a lot of the energy was sent up to the moon to the point where they ran out of energy.
Right.
Right. So, well, we know that there were vile experiments going on in the tower. So
Yeah,
it could
that's
be
fair.
something to do with that. You know, we knew that.
Oh, Owlus?
No, Lugae.
Lugae,
Well, because we also discussed
Yeah.
Owlus. But Lugae was doing some weird stuff in there. So perhaps it's something to do with him. Perhaps it's something to do with just the makeup of the tower. You know, it's obviously not. It's not the tower's not just the other ones, but this one, and not just artificial. There is some sort of weird, organic, magical nonsense going on with them.
And even if it's something as simple, like, I don't think it's this, but if it's very astrally tuned, for instance, or like very tuned in such a way that its aether corrupts the world around it, you could see that as just an extension of it. The other cool thing about a role quest like this would be actually contending with the tower. Maybe it's no longer there after the finishing of the role quest, and that also allows for a lot of the background elements saying that people wanted to rebuild Garlemald to be more of a potential thing.
Right. And then we see a really very, very interesting part of the story.
Very.
So we see in the ruins of Gelmora, in, I would say, specifically Tamtara, we see
agree.
what I would hypothesize are the Lambs of Dalamud.
See, that's the thing, but they're wearing black instead of red. So the one thing I think is that they're also possible is it's the remnants of the Black Mass Assassins.
So it could be. What they're channeling are statues of Vidoriga, right? So of
Yes.
the shark poignant.
That's the other thing, which ties them, the fact that they're in Gelmora, the fact that they're summoning Voidsent. Like, all these things are all things that the Lambs of Dalamud would typically be up to. So, like,
Right.
It makes sense for them to be Lambs of Dalamud. It's just interesting that they themselves don't seem part and parcel to the traditional iconography of them.
Right, yeah. So I think that's plausible. Unfortunately, I don't think we get a good view of their faces, do we?
No.
But this is fascinating. This is really interesting. We haven't seen Tamtara used since 2.x. So this is really interesting to me.
The one other possibility is that this is actually a revision to Tamtara. And what we are seeing is that there's been a small revision to part of Tamtara and for the new systems, the same way they have changed a bunch of Thousand Maws and maybe other dungeons. And so what this is not actually anything to do with 6.1 so much as it is a change to 2.0.
That's possible. In that case, it would be the Lambs of Dalamud then.
Probably, yeah. Because the other thing that would be weird is if it is Lambs of Dalamud, well, we're supposed to have gone in and cleared them out. So the fact that they would have managed to get back into the Tamtara Deep Croft seems odd.
The Lambs of Dalamud are small fry to us now. They're summoning baby Voidsent. They're not huge concerns to us now. So the whole revisionist sort of theory would make sense. But then again, they've already done it in E2. They've already explained Tamtara in a way that makes sense with Galvan.
What I would see this as is more of the second boss before the final boss has is a different room now that's more interesting, that doesn't change any of the lore, right? Because even if they're summoning Voidsent here, it doesn't really change much, it just becomes a more interesting engagement.
Okay, so you see it as first boss is demon, as it has always been, and then instead of being another demon for the second boss, they replace it with 3 Vidoriga or something similar.
Yes, or something like that.
Okay, they would need to change the layout, obviously, but they would need to. This is the platform at the bottom currently, as we see it. So they would need to take that and elevate it or copy it up, which is something they could do. They've said they don't want to mess with the structures of the 1.0 dungeons too much because it's not compatible necessarily to change in their current engine. You can copy it over. But they've already changed the layout of Tamtara when they did 2.0. They already changed the pathways. They already erased bridges. They already changed it. So,
what they showed us of Thousand Maw in the live letter today seems pretty. It seems like they actually made some pretty more
Yeah.
drastic adjustments. So
But
I think that's more on the table now.
yeah, but God knows Thasselmore needed it.
Well, and then we have Hien inside the tower of Babil with the appearance of, well, not quite. I don't think they're terminus beasts, but they no. One of them is a terminus beast we see during Vanaspati, the like horse.
Well, the Mirror Knights we see in that's the Mirror Knight model, which is an elegant chimera, but we do see them as terminus beasts. I believe in Amarat, so it would make sense. They're definitely terminus beasts in my mind.
We also see the I'm forgetting the name, but the eyes, the heck.
Yeah, the Hectides are also. Yeah, we have the alliance. Right, we have Raban. We have Hien.
Wait, what?
Yeah, you can
I
see
just
Raban.
noticed the person on the end.
Yeah, is that Nero?
That's Nero.
Yeah, right. That's Nero, right? I was just thinking about that.
I only just saw this for the first time.
Nero, Raban, Hien, and Fortuno and us. That's a huge lineup. That's crazy.
Yeah, well, and you wonder what the other lineup is doing, because there's you've got your Merlwyb, your Kanisena, your Americ. Like, what are they even up to?
I mean, to this day, I will maintain that Kanisena is Warrior of Light level powerful, and that's too powerful to give us as a common ally. But this is fascinating. This is really, really interesting to me. It's interesting to see Nero in his old armor, or it almost looks a little bit more exaggerated actually than his old armor.
Yeah, it does look like a revision, and you know what? I would have to go check it, but doesn't he like revise his armor during Omega?
Oh, I couldn't quite tell you off the top of my head, but I believe so. But that helmet is definitely new. It's longer than his old one.
Having Nero represent Garlemald here too, I feel like is powerful.
It's interesting, right? Because Nero has always been. We've discussed this before, and it's my personal thought that Nero did deserve, in terms of academics, not morality, just pure academics, more recognition than Sid. You know, the guy's done a lot of work, and I understand his bitterness. I'm a bit of a Nero stan, I suppose, technically, but I'm really glad to see him. I almost don't think he owes much fealty to the idea of Garlemald as a culture, as a people, as a nation. But it's interesting to see him here. He would definitely be interested in the towers.
Yeah, and I think he would profess that he's here for an interest in the research, like what Lugae might have had and stuff like that, right? But I think we see characters like Maxima, Lucia, like there are characters who are not part and parcel to what we consider the Garlean ideology, or in some ways maybe even culture, but are still representational of them as a people. And I still think that Nero falls under that. And so while he's not a representation of a Garlean's Garlean, he is still one of them.
He is, and we've seen some interesting stuff with Nero lately, right? We've throughout the eras throughout the last few expansions, we've seen Nero floating around, and he does some things, but we've never seen him settle down. We don't know where he lives. We don't know what he's doing in his everyday life outside of the raid series. So I just wonder if he's, sort of doing this as a place to belong, as a place to settle down, because where else is going to accept Nero, really?
Yeah, I feel like there's two questions at that, right? Which is, one, is that how he feels and he hides it using his love and desire for technology / like knowledge and fame and glory? Or does he actually just genuinely not feel that and actually only cares about knowledge and the acquisition of fame and glory? And I think Omega shows that he has depth. Like Omega clearly implies that he has depth, and aspects of the Crystal Tower clearly imply that he does have a greater depth to them, even if he does have a sincere desire for those things.
He does have depth, but I also don't think it condemns his desire for those things. I think it demonstrates that through growth he can pursue those things as his primary goals while still being a moral individual. I feel bad for these 3 Terminus Beasts. These are 5 extremely powerful people.
Yeah, they're about to get got. But then actually, maybe that was what I was about to touch on, which is these Terminus Beasts appear from nowhere. They don't come from people. They just teleport in, and that's not something we see as much.
I suspect this is a part of the haze that we see around the tower.
It's drawing the remaining Terminus Beasts to it, maybe?
Yeah. I shouldn't mention, I think this is definitely a duty, not a, like a story duty, not a dungeon.
Yes, Yoshi P also stated that it was going to actually be an interesting battle, and it was actually going to be probably hard fought. So I'm really excited for it to be like a really interesting duty.
Yes. Then we see Varshan channeling something.
Yes. Do you think that this is a result of him trying to fix how he, in his mind, messed up, or do you think that this is him trying to stop someone getting hurt and failing?
So he's obviously very determined and almost angry. I kind of see this as him holding something back.
Mhm.
Or I mean, it could also be like a like a giant laser beam of magic. I mean, God knows that even a single eye of an elder worm is extraordinarily powerful, so it makes sense. But I kind of feel like we can't speak on that. I think it flows directly from that scene where we saw him earlier in the trailer.
Yeah, it's very hard to tell or even guess at. And now we arrive at the grand moment and the thing that we've been waiting this whole time to talk about.
Yeah, and it's everything I could have wanted with the. I mean, provisionally, we're not going to see someone reading a lore note about the more of the Magi, but
it's not just a giant title card about Scala's history and who founded
right.
it.
Yeah, it's not a PDF. It's not they didn't automatically download a PDF onto my computer which showed me lore about the Yshtola. But
I would just like to point out that I love that if you had lore knowledge, literally a single image of this was all I needed to figure out what it was. And weeks in advance being like, this is what it is, this is what it means. And that is just exciting.
We knew ahead of time that this was representative of the Heavens of Thunder with Alamegan imagery. We knew what it was. We could tell.
Yeah, it was a very easy guess, right? Its iconography all ties into the heaven of lightning, and all of the griffins and everything ties back into the mythology that feeds into what Alamigo becomes, and that's so. To explain real quick, the heaven of lightning, the 12 gods of Eorzea, each exist in an elemental pair: 2 of fire, 2 of ice, 2 of lightning, 2 of water, 2 of earth, and 2 of wind. And each of those pairs also have a corresponding heaven and hell. And they have specific iconography associated with them, like a tower of lightning, much like what we saw with this image. And so not only do we get the heaven of lightning, but we immediately get the imagery of a man with a giant hammer. So I'm screaming, it's Byrago! And then right as I say that, the hammer pops into frame with Byrago's symbol. It's like, it's Byrago!
Right, exactly, with the similar Byrago. And this isn't necessarily how I envisaged Byrago, but it makes sense. I mean, it's like I said, I didn't necessarily expect to see the griffin imagery around this. I'm wondering if this is largely just an appeal to Ralga's imagery, which makes sense.
I read it much more as there is the griffins as imagery, and those things at some point were mistook and misunderstood and became Alamegan imagery. And there just wasn't Byrago, but they chose Ralgar, so they took that part of it, but they didn't take the Byrago part of it. So like, I just think that it is associated with lightning for them. The original intent was it was associated with those of lightning, and then it was misunderstood and misinterpreted by normal people.
That's fair, and we do know that griffins are native to Abalathia's spine, so it makes sense. So Byrago, he's got a halo of nails, which makes sense as a builder.
Yes.
He's startlingly Grecian, perhaps inappropriately Grecian.
And that is a theme that is going to carry through for quite a bit.
But, at least with him and Ralga, yes.
Yes, at the very least. And the interesting thing is, like you say, I did not necessarily... That was not how I envisioned him, but not like, oh, this is wrong. More just like, up until now, I didn't have a good imagery for him because we didn't have a real good descriptor of him.
Yes, and can I just say, this will apply to much of the fights going forward, but I am so excited to do this raid here.
Oh, dude, on a mechanical level, this made me so hyped, let alone the lore.
Yeah, seriously, both of them so, oh my god. So back in the background, we can see the statue of Ralga's Reach. I'm assuming that we will later fight Ralga atop. We see that later on in the trailer. I'm sort of imagining as we go Byrago, Ralga, and then either Azema / the twins, depending on the sort of order that goes in.
Yes, and the thing is, we know that there's 6 fights based off of the live stream because you could see the 6 encounter symbol in the UI, which means that there are at least 2 on accounted for encounters. Now, I definitely don't think there are 2 more of the 12 because I think it's going to be 4, 4, and 4.
Right.
But there is 2. I think I don't know if what's going to happen is there's going to be a first encounter that's not of the 12, and like if there's going to be an interstitial encounter between each, or if what's going to happen is there's going to be the 2 lightning, 1 interstitial, 2 fire, and then the true boss at the end.
I almost wonder if we're going to get Gurabanian imagery, Viragot, Ralga, Thanalinian imagery, and then one of the 2 gods and another of the 2 gods from there.
Well, this is flashing forward, but a lot of the stuff in the Heaven of Fire almost seems like pseudo-Egyptian and much more like maybe partly Carnian.
Right, I think Khan, Beladiah, Uldar all get their space in there. I mean, the fact that Azema is there, I mean, obviously it's because of the duality of the 12, but also the fact that Azema is there sort of mandates that there will be Beladian imagery.
Yes, or at the very least, the civilization that built Karn.
Yes. Yeah, one of the 2, both of... I mean, I don't necessarily think... like, we have our own theories, but the 2 are linked, at the very least.
Yes, or... This is not so much to counter, but I would say, at the minimum, Karn took so much from that civilization that part of its identity was built from that prior Karnian civilization. So
right,
Beladiah...
Yeah. So he's obviously got tattoos on him. They seem to be almost renditions of a similar nature to the hand symbol that is Biragot's symbol. So who do you think's saying this Glory of the Divine line? Do you think that's Biragot or Ralga?
So I think it's Virago because when we hear all the lines after this, it seems, this is assumption, but it seems like they are all voiced in conjunction with the person they are associated with. So it seems like Azema's voice lines are with Azema. It seems like Nalthal's voice lines are with Nalthal. So because of that, I take it that it is him. And to me, that is indicative that they are not, that they are definitely not ancients. I think they are the creation of ancients, or the unsundered world that exists to serve a function. Now, what that function is, I will touch on later as we get further into this.
That's interesting. I'm not ready to commit to that line of thought quite yet, but it's one I'm interested in seeing through. There are so many thoughts. This has been every lore nerd's wet dreams since 1.0, right?
Oh yeah.
Biragot, we've had very little lore on. We've had the creation myth and his outline, but Biragot is one of the less sort of exposited on gods.
I can't think of one that's left other than maybe Nymea, but even Nymea actually has some like lines.
Yeah.
To her.
Nymea definitely gets a little bit. No, Ocean's got a whole dungeon. Yeah.
He had a symbol. He used to have a symbol for crafting.
Yeah, right, exactly. That's Biragot's lot, right? Is that he's the crafter god, but he's not really involved in any of the crafter lore.
No.
So then we see the Heaven of Fire.
The Heaven of Fire.
Heaven of Fire looks awesome, by the way.
Lots of scales.
Lots of scales. The big sun imagery. The Heaven of Fire and Hells of Fire, of course, baked under the sun. The architecture here is fascinating to me because it obviously draws upon Arabic and Egyptian architecture, but it also looks a little bit like the vault to me.
Yeah, I can see like elements of like almost like Hagia Sophia, especially the domes and
right, the minarets and stuff. Yeah.
And so now I'm just like looking at all the elements around of it. But there's the obvious, you see the sands, the palm trees, the clear desert theme right across the board. And then thus making absolute sense why, Azema would become a representational goddess of Thanalin.
Yes, I mean, there's no denying here what exactly this is trying to represent to us. It's very clear this is the heavens/hells of fire. I would say the heavens of fire in this example. You've got the scales of Nalthal, but the scales, which isn't necessarily the main symbol of Nalthal, but we see throughout Beladian and Uldan imagery used to apply both to civilizations that worshipped Azema and Nalthal. You see them in Quan, you see them in Uldar.
Niniri, look at the ring around the scales and look at the scales in the center, and what does that kind of look like? A little bit like a cowrie shell.
Okay, yeah, I kind of see that.
And
That's
also,
interesting.
you could also see the sunboat in how the rings.
Right. So what I'm kind of seeing here is that it's got the scales to represent Nelthal and that almost look like a carriage cell, and then you've got the images around them which almost look like a sun imagery, right? The ones that don't have the scales in them look vaguely sun-like, right? With the little bark underneath them because it goes off both sides. It almost looks like I've been researching a little bit lately, Native American sort of history, so pre-Columbian history, and it almost looks like a Puebloan sort of imagery and stuff like that. So it's really fascinating. And then you've got the ones that don't have any circle on top of them, the ones that almost look like, the things that are on the bottom of the Naltal imagery, but with no circle on top of them. And those are interesting to me as well.
Every aspect of the design is clearly intentional.
Yes, which is, a hallmark of this game. This is a raid that I dreamed about exploring.
Oh, can you imagine showing it to ourselves playing 2.0?
Oh, right.
Hey all, so the last little bit of this got corrupted, and we're now 3 days older, 3 days wiser, and there's a little bit more to talk about that we might have missed on. Most of what we'll be talking about probably will be the exact same for what we recorded, but worth knowing that we might touch on a few things that have come to light in the days following. Primarily in that we have now seen the 6.1 trailer website more thoroughly, and so a lot of the ideas and thoughts that we had were more vindicated.
There's not a great deal that's come out, but there's some details that shed light on things that we were discussing a little more.
A really good one is the Final Fantasy XI dungeon. What is it called again?
Alzadal Undersea Ruins, I believe.
Right. Now, neither of us have, any real experience with 11, so this was something brought to our attention through the internet.
Yeah, I think through our Discord for me, actually, is where I saw it.
But just worth noting that design aesthetic for that dungeon clearly relates to what they're going for when it comes to the dungeon for 6.1. That doesn't change much. It's just interesting to note.
Yeah, I don't know a huge amount about the dungeon. I know that there are quicker in there. Excuse my pronunciation on that word. I've never been able to do it. I also know that it's sort of mysterious and that it's in the Treasures of Art Ergen expansion, which I believe is the sort of Middle Eastern inspired expansion.
Which loosely can tie it to a lot of what Thavnir is connected to.
Yeah, definitely.
The important thing to note is that when we recorded this to begin with, it was literally hours after, barely even hours after the trailer had launched. So there was not a lot of easy way to check anything. Now with the trailer website more filled out and easy to check, one of the things is we have that direct image of Grahatia at Silvertear Lake with some dude seemingly. But that also proves one of the things that we have talked about at length elsewhere, which is the image of Grahan, us walking over Silvertear, seems to definitely be tied to Mists of the Realm.
Yes, it does. Silvertear is absolutely tied. I'm still not 100% sold that the gods are what's under Silvertear. I still think it could just be a means of getting there, but it could go either way.
Absolutely. And there's a non-zero chance that at least one of the bosses is Lavos inspired.
That's true. That's definitely true.
I know you're pining for such things.
I am pining for such things. It's true.
So let's then kind of rapid fire through the Mists of the Realm stuff, because I think that was really what the main thing that was left and worth really interrogating. And so we have the Mists of the Realm's Grecian name, which is Agalea.
Yes, it is. So as we discussed previously in the lost content, this is a charity, which is a type of spirit in ancient Greece. So Greece didn't just have gods and personifications; it had spirits and nymphs and stuff like that. And they were the givers of all beauty and grace and things along those lines.
Yeah, almost more analogous to the kami in some way.
Yeah, I see that, but that's an interesting screenshot. He looks like he almost looks a little bit Charlian, but I don't think he is.
You don't suppose the fact that he's got all sorts of green associated with him, he kind of looks like a wanderer. Almost like he might be an embodiment of Oshan?
Interesting. That's an interesting point.
He doesn't have a walking stick.
No, he doesn't have a walking stick. He doesn't have He's not a Lalafell, but maybe that's just my Nimian bias. We know that doesn't bear true necessarily in the other gods that we see. Azuma's not on Mikote, so that could just be me. He could be. I mean, there's something to be said for that. He could also be a wandering priest or something,
Yes, one of Oshan's wandering priests. That's a really good point. We could see a lot more of the direct worshippers to the 12 that exist in Eorzea.
Yeah, I do wonder if that earring that he's got on that's a little bit conspicuous could shed a little bit more light if we had a different angle of it. There is a council in Sharlayan that is responsible for sort of mapping the saints of the 12 and presumably also acting as authorities on the religion of the 12. I wonder if he could be a member of that.
There's also multiple NPCs that talk about mythology all around Sharlayan proper as a city. So whether or not they tie in is anyone's guess, but there's multiple reasons to think that this person or any other NPC associated with this quest line could be tied to there.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. We shouldn't try to restrict our theories too much at this stage.
Do you think we'll pick up this quest in Mordona?
It's possible. I kind of think there has to be some involvement of the Sanctum of the 12, right? I mean,
at some point.
Yeah, they can't just have picked it for no reason. I think there must be something there.
I wonder if perhaps there's multiple entrances to the locations of the place that the Mist of the Realm takes place. What if, Silver Tier leads to one area, and there's something then connected to or beneath the Sanctum of the 12, and then there's also maybe a third location?
That seems plausible enough, yeah. We could see a third location in... Well, goodness, it could be anywhere, really, couldn't it? Could be anywhere. Could be at Kartana, who knows?
So then let's walk down the different gods. We've already talked about Byrago, but we have then Rhalgr and sort of his appearances. And I know that you have some thoughts about the inspiration for his looks, and both like historically, and then also how this ties into how we witnessed the almost direct way we witness him in Alamigo to what we end up getting, which is almost 1-1.
Yes, exactly. So I do think the gods that we see here are in the Heavens and Hells of Thunder are somewhat Grecian inspired, and I think there's definitely that twist on Rhalgr that we see here, maybe slightly more than the statue that we see in Girabania, but I think the inspiration is very clearly still there from the Girabanian interpretation of Rhalgr. I mean, I have various and diverse thoughts on what Rhalgr could be based on. We have evidence that his name might be based on an avatar of Vishnu called Rama. The inspiration from Thor and from other thunder gods like Indra and like Perun and Thor and sort of Jupiter are very clear.
Yeah, he's got a very Zeusy look going on, which I mean was always part of that is just being an old big guy with a slight Grecian look and white hair and lightning, but
right. It is. Like I said, like Birgot, it seems almost as if they're keeping the inspirations somewhat uniform between the paired gods to a degree. Birgot and Rhalgr both look somewhat Grecian. Although Birgot has got his halo, but then again, that's a motif across multiple different faiths, so it shouldn't just be linked to Christianity.
There is something interesting to note, though, about the way in which the Heaven of Lightning is heavenly in almost a Mount Olympian sense, compared to what seems to be the Heaven of Fire, which is much more... I don't want to just say the Egyptian afterlife, but it's definitely not... It doesn't have that same Olympian vibe, not just in its architecture, but in its mere existence, right?
Yeah, it draws more from the sort of connected religions of the Levant and of Mesopotamia and of Persia, I would say, than the Heavens of Lightning do. The Heavens of Lightning looks to me, somewhat Grecian. I don't think that it would be foolish to say that there are some elements from perhaps some slightly more Middle Eastern areas, but, slightly more Grecian. The building in the center is almost a cathedral-type structure.
Yeah, it almost again, many different groups use this, but with the halo and stuff, there's an almost pseudo-Christian little bit of touch there as well.
Yeah, what I do find interesting is that the sort of line art type stuff that's on Birgot's arm, face, and hammers, I believe, as well. You can also see the symbol over the in the center of the building almost looks to be of a similar kind of art style.
As well as the teleportation pad that we enter in. You could only see it during the live stream, but if you look closely, the teleportation pad symbol isn't any of the god symbols, and yet it's very distinctly and clear a symbol of some kind, and it also has the same purple crystal/glass underneath it.
Right, and I do wonder if this is perhaps, if we are seeing something related to the Unsundered World, I wonder if this is an organization within the Unsundered World, or the Followers of Anar, or some convocation symbol. I mean, it could be anything, couldn't it?
Truly. So moving on then, we enter into the Heaven of Fire, which we talked about a little bit in our day one part of this podcast, whatever you want to call it. One of the interesting things of which is that we also get to see it with the moon risen and the sun gone. And I believe we talked about this in the past, but do you think the idea is that Azima has come down from the sky and that's why the moon has risen? Because I don't think it's supposed to be Menfina or anything. It's clearly...
Oh, no.
Right. And it's clearly two fire and two lightning for this. And so my read on that is that the sun has descended.
Yes, I agree. I believe that we will see her, Azima, emerge out of the sun as the sun and descend to sort of meet us.
And on that, her design is... Whew, that is a flaming lady. I don't like that is literally the factual truth, but also it is a wonderful design.
Yes, yeah, it's a great design. It is. I've seen people discussing this, and it is slightly reminiscent of
Suzaku.
Yeah, Suzaku. Slightly reminiscent of Suzaku. Slightly. Obviously, it does also bear, a striking resemblance to the previous depiction of Azema that we've seen, the ones on her card and stuff like that. It's a really cool render. This game continues to surprise and delight with its character designs.
And it's funny because I don't want to say that the choices for their designs are conventional, because I feel like that is casting aspersions by saying that. But I love that I'm so delighted by them while they are still, in a sense, conventional choices.
Right, yeah, absolutely. It is really... They're not hugely surprising. I mean, I was surprised a little bit to see how Biragot was rendered, just because we have no inclination for how Biragot would look.
Right.
But still, the Azema one is slightly... it is how I would expect it. The Ralga one is somewhat how I would expect it. Naldenthal, I don't know if I could have guessed it, but it's not out of line with my expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things where the specifics of the elements are not what I would have known before or guessed at beforehand, but all the elements I understand of them are present, right? The twin aspect, the constructed aspect, there's all the elements to their design make perfect sense.
Yes, right.
So on that, then let's actually talk a bit about Nalthal. I mean, they look great.
Yeah, they do look awesome. They look really cool. They look less magey, maybe. Maybe that's not quite the right term, but I almost see elements of judge armor in their designs. Maybe that's just me sort of, equating smooth lines and sort of slightly jaggedness with these figures. But still,
there's a weight and an austerity to them, and they're mechanical, right? Which all of that really does tie into the design sensibility of the judge armor and the judges throughout Final Fantasy.
Right, yeah. What are your takes on them being mechanical?
Well, I mean, we know that they were constructed, so like in their creation myth, so that makes sense. And depending on what the nature of their existence is, how much is that really any different? If they were made through creation magics, really there's no difference between Azima and Nalthal in terms of one's flesh and blood and the other's mechanical, but as far as the world goes, there's no real difference. What I find interesting is when they fuse, their appearance looks far more Magus-like from the little we can see of it, and also, in my eyes, has a lot of design ideas and design sense, especially the trailing, the gown, the sort of tentacle things behind it that remind me a lot of Hades' true form during Amarot. which I know ties into your theory that you had on the convocation and the identity of the 12.
Yes, well, that's definitely true. I did hypothesize that Naldenthal were Emmett Selk and La Habrea, respectively, or at least a representation of them. So that's sort of pleasing to see that they do look similar. It does look similar, and obviously we can't speak hugely on this because we don't see a great deal of it. But their fused form does have that almost familiar aspect to it. And when they're split up, of course, they gain these wings. And we discussed these previously, didn't we?
Yeah.
We sort of gleaned a number of things. I thought they looked like the wings of the Lassie, or the Falsi, I forget which one it is, the corrupted ones from 13.
Yeah, I absolutely see it.
And we know they like to use 13 imagery in this game.
Yeah, we also get to see when they do their... It's not clear if it's their combined attack or if when they're fusing or how it's going on, but we get to see a combination of light and darkness, or maybe even heaven and hell, which makes sense because of the way they're kind of representative of life and death.
Right, exactly. They are. So they're gathered on this lantern thing, which I would be interested to, see in action a little bit more, because lanterns aren't a huge part of their imagery. That's obviously cowrie shells and scales. I do wonder if perhaps it's intended to be the center point in the scale, and they're like the two bowls on the scale.
Oh yeah, I really like that idea, and that also be really fun to see how that mechanically plays out.
Yes, I agree. Well, I'm really excited for all of these fights and to see how they go mechanically. It's a fascinating prospect. I always enjoy playing the raids when they come out.
Yeah, and also when people are in the early days, when people are more sweaty about it, it can be sometimes a little more fun than maybe as things start to slow down a bit.
Well, that's part of the fun, isn't it? The fun is to get in there and get manic and do poorly for a little bit in an instance that normally you'd find in the space of a relatively short amount of time, everyone's going to be finding decently easy, most likely. There have been some outliers, of course, but that's all part of the fun, is dying multiple times. Like I died many times doing Neo when they first came out.
So the last thing I think we want to talk about is the entity that seems to be breaking forth from the shadow. I have not been checking in on all the different people and what they say he's saying, because no one seems to really fully agree.
Right.
The only word I really seem to catch in English is it sounds like return or returned. And it seems like someone is coming back. I know that when we talked, one of the things I noticed when just off the bat was that his claw looks a lot like Erichthonios's claw from Asphodelos.
Yeah, when he's in his boss mode.
And there's also, a popular theory / consensus that he is our La Habrea before he's ascended to the role of La Habrea, which would be interesting if this was an avenue from which La Habrea returned to the narrative in current times. And so we got both a raid tier where that's talking about that, but also an alliance raid that's talking a bit about that. That I don't know how much I'm reaching with this, or how much this seems like, oh, that's possible.
Yes, I'm very apprehensive of saying that I believe that both raids will include La Habrea. I don't know if the writing team would commit to that, but I do agree that there is definitely a similarity between the hands.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I feel weird about saying it, because I don't think the writing team would necessarily double down like that. But also because Myths of the Realm is supposed to be, according to Yoshi P, also a mini epilogue to 6.0, having a proper send-off to all of the Unsundered would be nice, seeing as we never really got a meaningful send-off to La Habrea. Like, we got a 3.0, as good as it's going to get send-off to him, but compared to Elidibus and Emmett Selk,
Yeah, the disparity between the three members, but between La Habrea and the other two members of the Unsundered is huge. I mean, the Emmett Selk and Elidibus get to be such complex characters who are expanded upon to a great degree, and whose emotional states and histories we explore a little bit less in Elidibus's history, at least that we see, but still we get to hear about it. Meanwhile, Lahabrea, we get mentioned that he was, driven insane by his constant shifting between bodies, and that he was a creation magic specialist, essentially. But we really get very little else, so it would be very interesting to see more on him.
Yeah, I'm also perfectly fine for it to be just some ancient evil or darkness or something that Vana needed, as Hydaelyn, it needed to seal away or keep locked up, or anything like that would be perfectly fine. I mean, we know there's threats. Things like Ultima exist, right? We don't even know necessarily what Sabik is tied to. I have my own theories about that, but that's for a later date. But there's a lot of different dangers that it could be, and ones that we don't necessarily have a firm understanding of as well. We do know that Midgardsummer was tasked to guard Silvertear Lake, though, which, to me implies that if she's going to have all these locks on top of something, how bad is that thing?
Yeah, so I definitely think there's something dark under Silvertear. I don't think it needs to have something dark in it to need a guard, since it's, the grand source of the planet's aether, or at least the main one that we know of. But still, I do think there's something lurking under there. Obviously, my theory was originally that it's Lavos. I like to hold on to that still to a degree. But I am really excited to explore it and to see what might be down there. Whether it's something from the Unsundered World, whether it's something else entirely. Which I know I've seen people say that they would like to see, that they'd like to see, more fresh angles in storytelling. I personally am happy to see plenty more of the Unsundered World, but I understand why people would feel that way.
Yeah. Well, about a week to go.
Yeah, exactly. God, it's exciting to be near patch time.
Always. And then also stressful with the amount of content we're going to have to make for it.
Yes.
But with all that said, thanks for humoring us for this last little bit after our little snafu with the recording. And I've been Elliot Forcheron.
I've been Neri.
Thanks so much for joining us, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
This content was brought to you by the Eorzean Archives. If you enjoyed this video, help us please the 12 by leaving a like and subscribing for new content every Thursday. And comment down below with any topic you'd like to see our archons cover in the future. For even more content, discussion, and exclusives, please check out our Discord and consider supporting us on Patreon.